Today in the state of Texas, Democrats continue to delay a bill that would seem like common sense to most, sure does to me. The bill, SB 14, outlaws a surgery that sterilizes a child, including castration, vasectomies, hysterectomies, and mastectomies.
Okay, before we continue, we have to touch on the fact that a mastectomy definitely is not literally sterilizing anybody. But don't worry, this whole rant gets even more unhinged from here.
Life-changing operations that would change a child forevermore. Leave it to the media to, of course, put their spin on it, with the Associated Press describing SB 14 this way. The GOP-controlled legislature is pushing to make Texas the latest conservative state to crack down on medical care and, get this, the rights of transgender people. The rights of transgender people. That is not what this is about at all. We are talking about children. Children having life-changing operations that are irreversible.
So right here is just an absolute point of absurdity, because she's saying, oh, this isn't about the rights of transgender people, this is about the rights of children. Now think about that for a second. Where do trans people come from? Presumably, trans people were children at some point. I know I definitely was. And so, of course, yes, there are transgendered children. Oh my goodness gracious, we are so shocked to learn this information. But when they talk about irreversible changes, you need to understand something very, very important. There's a lot of effects of puberty that are irreversible. That's what puberty is in and of itself. So when it comes to things like hormone replacement therapy, what that is all about is quite literally just children going through the puberty that they are the most comfortable with. And so by denying trans children access to hormones, you are forcing them to undergo irreversible changes. So this is actually a very different situation than what Republicans are trying to make it seem.
Contrast this with Washington State, where Democrats have just made it legal for doctors to perform a number of these procedures without parental consent. Mastectomies without parental consent. And without even parental notification if there are, quote, compelling reasons not to notify the parent. Imagine if this were your child.
Now, why is that? Why would some kids not want to tell their parents about going through some sort of gender-affirming care? Could it possibly be because in the United States of America, we have a huge child abuse problem, especially targeted towards queer children, and that something around 40% of homeless youth are homeless because they are queer and kicked out of their house by their abusive parents? Maybe that has something to do with it. But of course, Kayleigh McEnany doesn't care about the safety of children. She cares about whether or not children grow up to fit her narrow ideological mold of what she thinks children should be, which of course we know to be property, because that's what Republicans think children are, is property.
Some are calling it state-sanctioned kidnapping. If you ask Americans, there are no two sides to this debate. A new Washington Post poll found that an overwhelming majority of Americans oppose puberty-blocking hormones for children. And let me be very clear. Even when you are doing a mastectomy for life-saving purposes, the surgery is life-altering, it is permanent, cannot be undone, and it is emotional.
So, this whole point about a mastectomy, let's really understand this. Yeah, it can be really distressing if you have to get a mastectomy and you are a woman. But you know what? The thing is there are a lot of cisgender men that will have to get mastectomies sometimes because they're start developing breast tissue. Because humans are biological creatures, biology is kind of wonky sometimes, and that is a thing that happens on occasion. And yet somehow, when men get a mastectomy, it's not really distressing for them. It's almost as though they're experiencing some sort of dysphoria related to their expression of gender, which of course is what gender-affirming care is meant to prevent. So yeah, if a young boy starts developing breasts and is distressed about that, they can get a mastectomy. And it shouldn't matter whether or not that young boy is trans or cis. But that's what she's failing to understand here. Because in her mind, oh, it's a sweet, innocent young girl that's getting a mastectomy against her will because she's being bullied into by doctors. When in reality, it is actually young boys who are trying to get mastectomy because they ended up going through a puberty that they were not comfortable with. And we can see when we look through it in that lens that this becomes very, very basic. And that's actually why I genuinely do not care that 68% of people don't agree with hormone blockers for children, because fundamentally, it actually doesn't matter. Are we going to sit around and poll people whether or not we think chemotherapy is effective? Are we going to actually listen to the doctors and what they have to say about it? Are we going to listen to actual patients, the trans people, and what they have to say about it? Because the harsh reality is, this is a simple question. Should kids be allowed to go through whichever puberty they're the most comfortable with, or should children be forced to go through a puberty that they are not comfortable with? That is a very, very simple question and answer. And the answer should obviously be yes, kids should go through whatever puberty they're most comfortable with at the normal puberty age. But of course, people like Kayleigh McEnany and other Republicans don't view being trans as something that is legitimate. They don't actually understand that people really are the gender that they say they are. They keep filling their heads with these ridiculous stories of hypothetical regret, when the reality is that transition-related care is some of the least regretted care that exists, period, stop. And that while, yes, some of the changes are permanent, they're wanted changes. Like, if you get a heart transplant, that's a permanent thing. And yet, it's nice to have a heart that works. So we can't just sit here and say, oh, it's permanent, it's permanent, it's permanent. Because the thing is, puberty is going to have permanent effects anyway. And if you let kids just have their first puberty be the one that they're actually comfortable with, they will have to deal with a lot less problems later on in life.